Welcome, listeners. If you're here, you already know, true crime isn't just about the crime itself. It's about the people, the decisions, the moments that turn ordinary lives into cautionary tales. It's about how love turns to betrayal, how greed turns to murder, and how justice fights to uncover the truth. And this case has it all. A self-made millionaire with everything to lose. A picture-perfect girlfriend with a dark secret. A trusted best friend who was always there. And a murder so meticulously planned that, for a moment, it almost looked perfect. But here's the thing about perfect crimes. They don't exist. Because every crime leaves a trail. And in the murder of Marco Santos, that trail led to something much bigger than anyone expected. Over the next episodes, we'll break it all down. The rise of a man who built an empire from nothing. The betrayal by the two people he trusted most. The money, the lies, and the digital breadcrumbs that exposed it all. And the trial that shocked a nation. So grab a coffee, settle in, and get ready. Because once you hear this story, you'll never look at a perfect couple the same way again. Death by Morning Brew, a true crime story. Davao City, June 15, 2024. A quiet, humid Sunday morning. The kind of morning where the air sticks to your skin and the world moves just a little slower except for Elena Mendoza. She's up at 6:30 a.m., just like she has been for the past 30 years. She feeds her parrot, waters the orchids on her front porch, and watches the world outside her small home on San Pedro Street. But this morning something is off. It's quiet. Too quiet. For the past 3 days, her neighbor Marco Santos hasn't left for work. No sign of him at his usual hour, 7:15 a.m., like clockwork. No coffee grinder humming through his kitchen window. No polite wave as he reverses his car out of the driveway. And then, there's the smell. Elena doesn't ignore things like this. She's lived here too long, seen too much. By 6:15 p.m., she's on the phone with the police. Her voice is calm, firm, like a woman who knows something is wrong before anyone else does. Something's not right at Marco's house, she tells the dispatcher. 3 days. No movement. And there's a smell. When officers Maria Tan and Benjamin Cruz arrived at 6:45 p.m., the sun was beginning to set. But even with the fading light, they could see the signs. The front door was locked, the curtains drawn. But that smell? That thick, cloying, sickly sweet scent of decay? It seeped through the cracks in the door. Anyone who's worked homicide knows it well. The officers circled the house. No broken windows, no forced entry. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Like a stage set, waiting for its actors to return. Then, at the side entrance, they found something. The key was still in the lock. Strange but not alarming until they stepped inside. The air was heavy, dense with the weight of something unnatural. The officers moved carefully through the house, past the neatly arranged furniture, the untouched coffee cups on the kitchen counter. Then, in the storage space under the stairs, they found him. Marco Santos, 41 years old, entrepreneur, philanthropist, coffee mogul, dead. His body was contorted, tucked away like an afterthought. But this wasn't a crime of passion. There were no signs of struggle, no blood spatter, no broken furniture. Whoever did this had planned it, carefully, deliberately, and just like that, the silence Elena Mendoza had noticed for 3 days became something else entirely, the silence of a life interrupted. Marco Santos, the man behind the success. Before Marco Santos became a headline, before his name became synonymous with one of the most shocking murders in Davao City's history, he was a success story, the kind the city loved to celebrate. In 2015, he started small. Coffee cart, nothing fancy. Just a young entrepreneur with a passion for beans. brewing coffee from locally sourced farmers. His secret? Quality and consistency. By 2024, Santos Morning Brew wasn't just a brand. It was a movement. 15 locations across Mindanao. Plans to go national. He had just signed a 45 million Cuban pesos expansion deal. And if you ask anyone who knew him, Marco wasn't just a businessman, he was a good man. He paid for students' college tuition, gave loans to struggling vendors, helped employees who needed emergency medical care. This wasn't just his business. It was his community. The last time anyone saw Marco alive was June 12, 2024. Security footage from his flagship cafe shows him arriving at 8:03 a.m. He's wearing his signature white polo, the one his girlfriend, Liane Ramirez, had given him for Christmas. He greets his staff, smiles at customers. From the outside, a normal day. But when you look closer, you start to see things. The way he keeps checking his phone. The way he rubs the back of his neck. A nervous habit. Something was off. He knew it. The day he died started just like any other. At 9:15 p.m., Marco called his mother. She remembers the conversation vividly. He sounded happy, she told investigators. Said he was having tea with Liane. They were planning a trip to Boracay. At 9:27 p.m., he posted a photo. 2 teacups. Soft candlelight. The caption? Perfect end to a perfect day. #blessed. A simple post. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except when investigators found the cups in his kitchen 3 days later. One had lipstick on the rim. The other tested positive for sedatives. And just like that, the perfect day was revealed for what it really was, the final act in a carefully planned performance. Here's where it gets even more chilling. We know Marco had plans that night, big ones. In his briefcase, tucked neatly under some papers, detectives found a small velvet box. Inside, an engagement ring. The jeweler later confirmed. Marco had picked it up that morning, engraved with their initials, custom-made. A proposal months in the making. But Marco never got the chance to ask the question. Instead, sometime between 9:30 p.m. and midnight, he drank his tea. The sedatives kicked in and his perfect life, the life he had built from nothing, ended under the stairs of his own home. Now, the real question isn't just who killed Marco Santos, but why. And that's where this case gets even more disturbing. Because the person he trusted most, the one he had planned a future with, was hiding something. Her name was Liane Ramirez. And if you think Marco's story was shocking, wait until you hear hers. If you looked at Marco Santos and Liane Ramirez from the outside, you'd think they were perfect together. In the world of social media, they were #couple goals. Every post was curated, every moment framed in golden hour lighting. Fancy brunches, luxury vacations, charity events, they were the kind of couple people envied. But the thing about social media, it's a story, and stories can be rewritten, re-edited, reimagined. Because the truth about Liane Ramirez? It was never as picture-perfect as it seemed. Liane Ramirez, the social media star. Liane Ramirez knew how to make people believe in a dream. She had started out as a flight attendant for Philippine Airlines, traveling across Southeast Asia, taking selfies in first-class cabins, sipping champagne in rooftop lounges. To her 500,000 Instagram followers, she was living the dream. But behind the curated posts and the perfect filters, Liane was drowning in debt. Her bank statements from 2022 told a different story. Over 2.3 million Cuban pesos in credit card debt, missed loan payments, and an insatiable taste for luxury she couldn't afford. Designer bags, fine dining, private gym memberships. Then she met Marco. He wasn't like the other men who slid into her DMs. He was successful, generous, genuine. A businessman who didn't just throw money around but invested in people. And Leanne? She became his latest investment. She left her airline job, rebranded as Leanne Lifestyle, and stepped into the world of high-end influencers. Her new job? Being the perfect girlfriend. Marco financed her lifestyle. The trips, the gifts, the condo in Davos City's most exclusive complex. She became the face of Santos Morning Brew's community outreach, co-hosting charity events, sitting in on business meetings, positioning herself as Marco's equal in success. But there was one small problem. Leanne never wanted to be equal. She wanted to be in control. Scroll through their Instagram history, and you'll see the fairy tale unfold. Candlelit dinners at Manila's finest restaurants. Sunsets in Ciargo. Matching watches on their anniversary. One post in particular stands out. March 15, 2024. A photo of Marco and Leanne at Marina Tuna, their favorite restaurant. He's laughing, caught mid-joke. She's leaning in, smiling like he's the only person in the world. The caption? When you know, you know. Ring soon. Hashtag Santos Soulmate. Thousands of comments flooded in. You guys are goals. The perfect couple doesn't EXI. Can't wait for the wedding. And that was the point. To make everyone believe in the perfect couple. They were everywhere, opening new Santos Morning Brew locations, shaking hands with politicians, networking with business elites. Marco, ever the visionary, had big plans for the future. A national expansion of his coffee empire. A joint business venture with Leanne for a luxury lifestyle brand. A wedding. Maybe even a family. It was all set. Until Marco started noticing the cracks. The first person to notice something was wrong wasn't Marco. It was Linda, his longtime secretary. 2 weeks before the murder, Marco had asked her to double-check all recent financial transactions. Something felt off, he said. What Linda found would later become key evidence in the case. Small, unexplained transfers to offshore accounts, deposits linked to a burner phone number, money slowly siphoned from company funds. At the time, Marco didn't think it was Leanne. He assumed it was an accounting error, something minor. But then there were the disappearances. Leanne started missing meetings, canceling plans last minute. She claimed it was brand deals, content creation, influencer events. But the locations didn't match. Marco's driver noticed it first. On nights when she said she was at a business dinner, her GPS pinged at Elite Gym's underground parking lot. The same place Daniel Cruz was known to frequent. Then came the insurance policy changes. Linda recalled a phone call between Marco and his lawyer just 1 week before the murder. He had been inquiring about updating his will. Specifically, removing Leanne as a beneficiary. He didn't give a reason, but we know now he had started to suspect something. And then, there was the text message, sent to his mother, 1 week before he died. Mom, is it normal to feel like someone's watching you sleep? Marco never followed up, never explained. But in his bedroom, hidden behind a framed photo of him and Leanne, investigators later found something chilling. A tiny surveillance camera, wired to an external recording device. It had been placed there weeks before his murder. And when the footage was analyzed, it wasn't Marco who had set it up. It was Leanne. Because long before Marco Santos was found dead under his own stairs, his perfect girlfriend had already been planning his perfect murder. And she wasn't doing it alone. Because in the shadows, waiting just out of sight, was the person Marco trusted most. His best friend, Daniel Cruz. And that's where this story takes its darkest turn. In every murder case, there's a moment where everything shifts. A moment where suspicion turns into certainty, where questions start forming patterns, and the truth, ugly, twisted, undeniable, begins to take shape. For detectives working the Marco Santos case, that moment came when they started looking into Daniel Cruz. Marco's best friend, his business partner, his trusted advisor, and, unbeknownst to him, the man who was secretly planning his murder. Daniel Cruz, the trusted advisor. To understand why Daniel betrayed Marco, you have to go back 20 years, back to their college days at 8 Neo de Davao University. Marco and Daniel weren't just classmates. They were inseparable. Marco was the dreamer, the risk-taker. Daniel was the strategist, the numbers guy. While Marco was mapping out his future in coffee, Daniel was perfecting the art of making money move. By the time Marco opened his first Santos morning brew cart in 2015, Daniel was already deep in the world of finance, helping startups secure funding, making lucrative investments. When Marco's business took off, he brought Daniel in as a silent financial advisor. And for a while it worked. But behind the spreadsheets and polished image, Daniel Cruz had a secret. He was drowning in gambling debt. The casinos in Macau, the underground poker games in Manila, the cryptocurrency speculation. Daniel had played the market, and the market had played him back. By 2023, he owed more than 15 million Cuban pesos to offshore lenders. Money that even Marco didn't know about. And when you owe that kind of money, desperation makes you do things you never thought you were capable of. When Daniel first met Lian Ramirez, she was just Marco's girlfriend. But by late 2023, things had shifted. Investigators later uncovered a pattern. Daniel and Lian frequented the same high-end gym, attended the same exclusive events, exchanged flirty messages that Marco never saw. It was small at first, a lingering glance, a drink too many at a private dinner. But it escalated quickly. By early 2024, their text messages were explicit, obsessive, and most importantly, secret. They spoke in code, using a burner phone Lian kept in her gym locker. When police later cracked it open, they found over 500 deleted messages between her and Daniel. And those messages, they weren't just romantic. They were about Marco, about his schedule, his habits, his finances, his vulnerabilities. In one message, sent 2 months before the murder, Lian wrote, "Once he's out of the way, we can finally have what we deserve." And Daniel? He responded with a single word. Soon. On the surface, nothing changed. Daniel and Marco were still best friends, business partners, confidants. They still grabbed coffee together, attended board meetings, laughed like brothers. But beneath it all, Daniel was orchestrating his betrayal. The financial setup. He helped Lian siphon money from Marco's business into offshore accounts under fake company names. The surveillance. He had cameras installed in Marco's home, telling him they were for security reasons. In reality, they were watching him. The alibis, he and Lian staged business trips that were really secret planning meetings. Then there was the final purchase. Investigators found a receipt dated June 5, 2024, 1 week before the murder. A hardware store. The purchase? A length of nylon rope, a roll of industrial-grade duct tape, and a bottle of chloroform. The payment? Daniel's credit card. It was right there, in black and white, and yet Marco still trusted him, still called him his brother, still had no idea that the man standing beside him was counting down the days until he would help take his life. The night it happened, at 9:27 p.m. on June 12, 2024, Marco posted his now infamous Instagram photo, 2 teacups on the kitchen counter. What he didn't know was that just 3 minutes later, Daniel Cruz was pulling into a parking spot 2 blocks away. By 9:40 p.m., Marco was unconscious. By 10:15 p.m., Daniel was in the house. By midnight, Marco Santos, the man who built an empire from nothing, was dead. And the 2 people he trusted most? They were already rehearsing how they'd pretend to grieve. Because for them, the real work was just beginning. They still had to cover it up. They still had to make sure they got away with it. But as detectives would soon uncover, even the perfect murder plan leaves a trail. And when they started following that trail, it led right back to Daniel Cruz and Leanne Ramirez. So how did investigators put it all together? That's what we'll uncover next. The best crimes aren't spontaneous. They're designed, engineered, built piece by piece until the moment comes to set the plan in motion. For weeks, Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz had been doing exactly that. Planning, preparing, ensuring that when Marco Santos died, everything would look perfect. But what they didn't count on, that perfection would be exactly what gave them away. Preparation, the art of murder. The first clue that this wasn't a crime of passion? The paper trail. Investigators later uncovered a detailed sequence of financial movements, supply purchases, and digital breadcrumbs that pointed to a murder plan down to the minute. May 2024. The money moves. Leanne and Daniel begin siphoning funds from Marco's business into offshore accounts. A new life insurance policy is signed, with Leanne as the primary beneficiary. Marco starts asking questions about his finances. June 5, 2024. The shopping list. Daniel purchases nylon rope, industrial duct tape, and chloroform from a hardware store in Davao City. Leanne buys a burner phone, used exclusively for her communications with Daniel. A secure storage space in Marco's home, the one he would later be found in, is mysteriously cleared out. June 10th to 11th, 2024. The final steps. Leanne insists on spending the night at Marco's house for the next few days. Daniel withdraws 500,000 Cuban pesos in cash, a potential escape fund. Surveillance cameras in Marco's house, the ones Daniel helped install, are conveniently disabled the night before the murder. By June 12th, everything was set. All that was left was execution. Execution. The night it happened. June 12th, 2024, 8:03 a.m. The last normal day. Marco arrives at Santos Morning Brew's main branch. Security footage shows him smiling, greeting staff. No one knows it will be his last morning alive. 12:15 p.m. Lunch meeting. Marco meets with his expansion team. They discuss the 45 million Cuban pesos deal that would take his business national. 2 p.m. conference call. Marco finalizes contract details. A new era for his company is about to begin. 9:15 p.m. The final phone call. Marco calls his mother. He's happy. He tells her he's drinking tea with Leanne and planning a trip to Boracay. 9:27 p.m. The last social media post. Marco posts a photo of 2 teacups. The caption reads, "Perfect end to a perfect day. #blessed. But the tea wasn't just tea. Leanne had laced it with sedatives. Within 20 minutes, Marco was struggling to stay conscious. By 10:15 p.m., Daniel arrived. From this point on, every minute was planned. 10:20 p.m., Leanne texts Daniel. He's ready. 10:30 p.m., Daniel enters the house through the side door. 10:35 p.m., Marco is barely conscious. He tries to move to speak, but he can't. 10:40 p.m., Daniel restrains Marco with nylon rope and duct tape. 10:50 p.m., Marco fights, but he's too weak. Daniel presses a pillow over his face, suffocating him. 11:05 p.m., Marco Santos is dead. The cover-up. With Marco dead, the real work began, erasing the evidence. And at first, it worked. Step 1, the cleanup. Leanne and Daniel wipe down all surfaces for fingerprints. The murder weapon, a pillow, is disposed of at a remote location. Marco's phone is left on the table to make it seem like he simply went to bed. Step 2, the staged discovery. Leanne leaves Marco's house at 6 a.m., pretending everything is normal. 3 days later, She puts on the performance of a lifetime. She shows up at the scene when police arrive, feigning shock, crying into a designer scarf. She records over 200 takes of her reaction video before posting it online. Before Marco's death is even confirmed, Daniel, meanwhile, plays the grieving best friend. He posts a tribute to Marco on social media, claiming he's in shock, even though just hours earlier, he was wiring stolen money into an offshore account. The perfect plan falls apart. First, everything looked clean. The police had no immediate suspects. Marco's death was almost ruled an accident, until forensic analysis proved otherwise. And then, the lies started unraveling. Deleted text messages were recovered. Financial records didn't add up. Surveillance footage showed Daniel's car near Marco's house that night. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Daniel's fingerprint on a roll of duct tape. The tape used to restrain Marco. The perfect murder was no longer perfect. Because in the end, no crime is ever truly flawless. And as the police started piecing it all together, one thing became clear. Leanne and Daniel weren't just going to lose everything they had planned. They were going to spend the rest of their lives paying for it. But how did detectives finally catch them? Every case has a tipping point, a moment when things shift from uncertainty to clarity, when details that once seemed meaningless start forming a pattern. In the murder of Marco Santos, that moment came almost immediately, because the crime scene told a story that didn't match the one Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz were trying to sell. What looked at first like a well-executed crime turned out to be anything but. When forensic investigators entered Marco's home, they expected to find a simple case. Maybe a burglary gone wrong. Maybe an accident. What they found: a crime scene designed to look too perfect. The first look. No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. No struggle. Everything in its place except for the body. Marco's house was immaculate, almost like someone had wiped it down. But the body? That told a different story. The forensic findings. Marco was found under the stairs. But his body wasn't stiff. This meant he had been moved. Ligature marks on his wrists and ankles indicated he had been restrained. The cause of death? Asphyxiation. Someone had smothered him. His teacup tested positive for sedatives. Then there were the small things, the details that cracked the case wide open. The duct tape. A single partial fingerprint was found on the edge of a discarded roll. When it was run through the database, it matched Daniel Cruz. The first 48 hours after a murder are the most critical. In this case, investigators had two things working against them. Leanne and Daniel were prepared. They had alibis, they had their stories straight. Marco's death almost looked accidental. Almost. But then the red flags started stacking up. Step 1: Witness interviews. Elena Mendoza, the neighbor who first called the police, recalled seeing Leanne leave Marco's house early on the morning of June 13th, but not before. Marco's driver noted that Leanne had been spending more time alone in Marco's house in the weeks leading up to his death. Marco's secretary, Linda, revealed that Marco had recently asked about removing Leanne from his will. One witness statement wouldn't mean much, but all of them, together, they painted a picture of someone trying to take control of Marco's life. Step 2: Surveillance footage. Security footage from Marco's neighborhood showed Daniel's black Honda CR-V parked 2 blocks away on the night of the murder. Footage from a nearby gas station showed Daniel buying nylon rope and duct tape on June 5th. A hidden CCTV camera at a neighbor's house caught Leanne leaving Marco's home at 6 a.m. on June 13th, hours after Marco was already dead. Step 3: Phone records and digital evidence. Marco's phone logs showed multiple calls to his lawyer in the days before his death. Daniel's burner phone, the one Leanne kept in her gym locker, was recovered and forensically reconstructed. The messages, They weren't just conversations. They were blueprints for a murder. Leanne and Daniel thought they had it all figured out. But the more they spoke, the more their own words betrayed them. Leanne's shifting story. First interview. Marco and I had tea together, and I left around 9:45 p.m. Later interview. Actually, I stayed overnight and left early the next morning. Problem? Her own social media betrayed her. Her Instagram stories showed her getting a manicure at 10:30 p.m. when she was supposedly at Marco's house. Daniel's grief didn't add up. First interview. I was at home the whole night. Phone records showed his burner phone was active near Marco's house at 10:15 p.m. Receipts showed he purchased duct tape and nylon rope a week before the murder. Then came the biggest red flag of all. The missing money. Investigators traced 2.5 million pesos in withdrawals from Marco's business account in the weeks before his death. The account was linked to Daniel's offshore holdings. It was funneled into a cryptocurrency wallet, one that only had 2 authorized users, Leanne and Daniel. The case had circumstantial evidence. It had financial motive. It had inconsistent alibis. But what detectives needed was a smoking gun. And they found it in Marco's house, hidden in the back of a kitchen drawer, buried under paperwork. A tiny, inconspicuous flash drive. It contained security camera backups. The original feed from Marco's home, before Daniel had disabled the system. And at 10:35 p.m. on June 12, 2024, it showed Daniel Cruz walking through Marco's front door. It showed Leanne handing him something. And then, cut to black. But the damage was already done. Because in that moment, investigators knew. Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz weren't just suspects anymore. They were caught. With Leanne and Daniel's lies unraveling, detectives turned to their next tool, the digital trail. What they found would turn an already airtight case into something even more shocking. Because Marco Santos wasn't just murdered. He was hunted. And the evidence that proved it was sitting in the cloud. Murder leaves a trail, not just in blood or fingerprints, but in data. And in the case of Marco Santos, his killers left more than just a few clues. They left behind a digital roadmap to murder. From deleted text messages to GPS coordinates, from cloud backups to suspicious online searches. Every step of the crime was buried in their devices. All detectives had to do, follow the breadcrumbs. Investigators started with the basics. They pulled Marco's emails, his phone records, his financial logs. But the real jackpot, Leanne and Daniel's online activity. Deleted messages recovered. Forensic software retrieved over 500 messages between Leanne and Daniel from a wiped device. One text from Leanne, sent 1 week before Marco's death, stood out. We need to be careful. He's starting to notice things. Daniel's response? Let's move faster. We don't have much time. Social media, the timeline betrays them. Leanne posted an Instagram story at 10:30 p.m. on June 12th. During the time she was supposedly having tea with Marco. Daniel liked her post at 10:42 p.m., right in the middle of Marco's murder. A timestamp on a deleted WhatsApp call log showed Daniel calling Leanne at 11:06 p.m. This was no crime of passion. It was a coordinated effort. Search history. The internet knows everything. Investigators examined Daniel and Leanne's devices. Among the recovered searches, undetectable poisons Philippines. How long does it take to suffocate someone? How to delete phone location history, but perhaps the most chilling search? From Leanne's laptop, 2 months before Marco's death. How much does a person's life insurance pay out in the Philippines? She already knew Marco was going to die. During a search of Leanne's condo, detectives found something they weren't supposed to find. A burner phone. hidden in her gym locker. Leanne thought she was smart. The phone had been factory reset. No saved contacts, no message history, no call logs. But what she didn't know, digital forensics can bring ghosts back to life. Recovered deleted messages. Investigators restored entire conversations from encrypted backups. They found Daniel and Leanne's full murder planning, from selecting sedatives to staging an alibi. One message, just hours before the murder, read, "Leanne, he's drinking the tea now. Shouldn't take long. Daniel, see you soon." Location data puts Daniel at the crime scene. Even though Daniel's main phone was at home, the burner phone pinged near Marco's house on the night of the murder. And when compared with surveillance footage, it matched the exact time of his arrival. Connection to other devices. The phone had been linked to Daniel's home Wi-Fi network multiple times. It also had been used to log into one of Leanne's anonymous social media accounts. This wasn't just one piece of evidence. This was a direct digital confession. It wasn't found on a phone. It was in the cloud. Recovered practice videos. Detectives found deleted videos from Leanne's Google Drive. The footage, Leanne rehearsing her grieving girlfriend reaction, fake crying, adjusting her angles, reshooting her discovery scene. Timestamp? 3 days before Marco's body was found. Photo evidence timeline. GPS metadata showed Daniel and Leanne in the same hotel room, on nights when they both claimed to be working. Screenshots of Marco's financial records were recovered from Leanne's laptop, proving she had been monitoring his accounts. Document recovery. The will that changed everything. One of the most damning files was an unsigned document detectives found in Leanne's backup storage. It was a draft of Marco's will, one that listed her as the sole beneficiary. The problem? It was created before Marco's actual will had been changed. Meaning, Leanne had been planning to take everything from him before he was even dead. Location data history. Following the crime. Leanne's phone location matched the crime scene until 6 a.m. on June 13th, the morning after Marco's death. Daniel's burner phone left the same area just an hour later. 2 killers. 2 devices. One perfectly coordinated crime now completely exposed. With all this digital evidence, Leanne and Daniel's alibis collapsed. The burner phone put Daniel at the crime scene. The search history proved premeditation. The deleted messages were a step-by-step blueprint of the murder. And the practice videos? They exposed the entire act for what it was. Leanne's perfect grief was nothing more than a performance. Daniel's perfect alibi was nothing more than a cover. And now, they weren't just suspects. They were done. The digital trail led to one undeniable truth. Marco Santos was murdered for greed. But while the messages and videos proved intent, investigators needed to uncover the final piece. Where did all of Marco's stolen money go? And more importantly, had Leanne and Daniel planned to disappear before they got caught? That's what we'll uncover next. Murder for money is one of the oldest motives in the book. But in the case of Marco Santos, the greed behind his death wasn't just about stealing his wealth. It was about taking everything he built and disappearing before anyone could ask questions. And if investigators wanted to fully understand why Marco had to die, they had to follow the money. Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz weren't amateurs. They knew how to cover their tracks. They used multiple accounts, fake businesses, and offshore transfers to move money out of Marco's hands and into their own. But what they didn't know, every transaction leaves a fingerprint, and investigators were about to trace it all back to them. The stolen bank transfers. In the months leading up to Marco's murder, 2.5 million pesos disappeared from his company accounts. Small, unnoticed withdrawals were funneled into a shell company under Daniel's name. The company? It didn't actually exist. The cryptocurrency scheme. Daniel used stolen money to buy Bitcoin, then transferred it to an anonymous wallet. The Bitcoin was cashed out just 1 week before Marco's murder. Transaction records showed Leanne receiving a direct transfer from the same wallet. The wire transfers to international accounts. Detectives traced 3 large wire transfers, totaling 8 million pesos, to offshore accounts. The accounts opened under fake names in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. And who controlled those accounts? Leanne and Daniel. Marco had been funding his own murder, and he never even knew it. The insurance angle, a murder for a payout. If there was ever a smoking gun for motive, this was it. In the weeks before Marco's murder, detectives uncovered suspicious changes to his life insurance policies. The mysterious new policy. Marco already had a life insurance policy for years, naming his mother as the primary beneficiary. But just 3 weeks before his death, a new policy worth 10 million pesos was signed. The new primary beneficiary? Leanne Ramirez. Premium payments came from who? Leanne made the payments for the new policy herself. Why would someone else pay for someone's life insurance? Unless they were planning to collect the fast-tracked claim. 3 days after Marco's body was found, Leanne filed the paperwork to claim the full 10 million Cuban pesos payout. She was expecting a quick payout. But what she didn't expect. Investigators were already tracking every step. Leanne hadn't even waited for Marco's funeral. To her, he was just a transaction. The asset trail, what they were really after. What do you do when you're about to inherit millions? You start shopping. And that's exactly what Leanne and Daniel did, before Marco was even dead. The property purchases. Just 10 days before Marco's murder, Leanne paid the down payment on a luxury condo in Makati. The problem? She had no official source of income. Where did the money come from? Stolen funds from Marco's business. Gold bars and hard assets. Daniel converted over 3 million pesos into gold bars through a private dealer. Why gold? It's untraceable. Easier to hide. Perfect for disappearing. Offshore accounts and shell companies. Detectives uncovered at least 3 shell companies set up in the months before Marco's murder. These companies were nothing more than fake names with offshore accounts. They were used to launder stolen money before Daniel and Leanne could withdraw it clean. The plan was simple. Kill Marco. Collect the insurance money. Transfer everything into offshore accounts. Disappear. They were days away from getting away with it. But then the police caught up. The moment it all fell apart. Leanne and Daniel had spent months covering their tracks. But they made one fatal mistake. The transfer that exposed it all. Just 2 days after Marco's death, Daniel made a final transfer of stolen money, 1.2 million pesos, to one of his offshore accounts. But he made it from his personal bank account. That was all investigators needed. One single mistake. One transaction that proved premeditation. With financial records, insurance fraud, and asset purchases all pointing back to them, their alibis collapsed. The motive was clear. The evidence was airtight. And now, Leanne and Daniel weren't just murder suspects. They were about to face the full weight of the law. With the money trail exposed, the prosecution had everything they needed. But before the trial began, investigators had to pull together the final pieces. DNA evidence. Forensic timelines. Expert testimony. Marco's killers thought they had executed the perfect crime. But in the next chapter, we see how detectives turned their mountain of evidence into an ironclad case. One that would send Leanne and Daniel exactly where they belonged. Straight to trial. And if you think justice came easy, you'd be dead wrong. By the time Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz were arrested, detectives had built a case so airtight, it left no room for doubt. The financial records exposed their motive. The burner phone? captured their conspiracy. The digital trail traced their every move. But now, prosecutors had one job: turning all that evidence into an undeniable courtroom-ready case. And the way they did it? By building the perfect timeline. Building the timeline every second counts. The key to conviction wasn't just proving Leanne and Daniel were guilty, it was proving when, where, and how they did it. To do that, investigators had to create a minute-by-minute breakdown of the murder, cross-referencing security footage, phone records, and financial transactions. Security camera footage compilation. Marco's coffee shop footage, June 12, 8:03 a.m. Marco arrives for work, wearing the same white polo he was found dead in. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood, June 12, 9:40 p.m. Leanne's car is parked in front of Marco's house. CCTV from a nearby street, June 12, 10:15 p.m. Daniel's black Honda CR-V is seen 2 blocks away. Witness statement correlation. Elena Mendoza, neighbor: I saw Leanne leave the house at sunrise, but I never saw Marco. Marco's driver: Leanne started spending more nights at Marco's place before he died. Linda, Marco's secretary: Marco told me something felt off with his finances. Phone record analysis. 9:27 p.m. Marco's final Instagram post, 2 teacups. 9:30 p.m. Leanne texts Daniel, "It's done. He drank it." 10:35 p.m. Daniel's burner phone pings near Marco's house. 11:06 p.m. Daniel calls Leanne. Credit card transaction timeline. June 5th. Daniel buys rope, duct tape, and chloroform. June 10th. Leanne makes a down payment on a luxury condo in Makati. June 13th. Leanne attempts to claim Marco's life insurance payout. Social media post timeline. Leanne posts an Instagram story at 10:30 p.m. on June 12th, while supposedly having tea with Marco. Daniel likes her post at 10:42 p.m., right as Marco was dying. The timeline painted an undeniable picture. Leanne sedated Marco, Daniel suffocated him, and together, they tried to erase every trace of their crime. While the digital and financial evidence told the story, detectives knew they needed hard, physical proof to lock in the case. And the forensics team delivered exactly that. DNA analysis results. Strands of Leanne's hair were found on Marco's bedsheets, proving she was there the night of the murder. Sweat residue matching Daniel was found on the duct tape used to restrain Marco. Fingerprint matches. Daniel's fingerprint was found on the duct tape roll. Leanne's fingerprint was found on Marco's teacup. Fiber evidence. Fibers from the nylon rope used to tie Marco's wrists were found inside Daniel's car. Small carpet fibers from Marco's staircase were found on Leanne's shoes. Tool mark analysis. The zip ties used on Marco's wrists were cut with a specific brand of scissors, a brand that Daniel had purchased the week before. Chemical residue findings. Traces of sedatives were found in the teacup. Residue from the duct tape adhesive was found on Marco's skin. Leanne and Daniel had cleaned up well, but not well enough. The final step? Proving it all beyond reasonable doubt. The prosecution lined up a powerhouse team of experts to testify at trial, ensuring Leanne and Daniel wouldn't walk away. Forensic experts. The science of murder. A forensic pathologist confirmed Marco was alive when he was tied up. A toxicologist testified that the sedatives in Marco's tea would have left him too weak to fight back. Digital forensics report. The tech evidence. A cybersecurity expert retrieved deleted texts, emails, and location data from Leanne and Daniel's phones. Recovered Google searches proved premeditation. Financial expert analysis. Following the money. A forensic accountant connected every stolen peso to Daniel's offshore accounts. Evidence showed Leanne had attempted to claim Marco's life insurance payout just days after his murder. Psychological profiling, the mind of the murderers. A criminal psychologist profiled Leanne as a narcissistic manipulator who viewed Marco as a financial stepping stone. Daniel was described as a desperate gambler, willing to kill his best friend to escape his debts. Crime scene reconstruction, the final nail in the coffin. Using all the evidence, forensic analysts recreated Marco's final moments, showing exactly how he was sedated, restrained, and suffocated. The case was ready. The prosecution had it all. Motive? Greed. Opportunity? A pre-planned crime. Physical evidence? Fingerprints, DNA, fibers. Digital proof? Texts, calls, location data. Financial fraud? Offshore accounts, stolen assets. Psychological profiling? Cold, calculated killers. Leanne and Daniel thought they had planned the perfect murder. But the evidence was undeniable. And when they stepped into the courtroom, they wouldn't be walking back out. Next, the trial that shocked the nation. With the case ready for court, it was time for the real battle to begin. Would Leanne and Daniel maintain their innocence? Would their legal team find a way to fight back? And would justice finally be served for Marco Santos? By the time Leon Ramirez and Daniel Cruz walked into the courtroom, the case against them was overwhelming. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence: financial fraud, digital breadcrumbs, security footage, forensic proof. And yet, they still thought they could get away with it. They walked in with expensive lawyers, the best defense money could buy. But money can't erase the truth. Because in the weeks that followed, their perfect defense would fall apart, piece by piece. And when it did, the entire nation was watching. The prosecution strategy, telling the story of a murder. From day one, the prosecution had a clear goal: make the jury see the murder unfold, step by step, moment by moment, until there was no doubt who was responsible. The opening statements, setting the stage. The lead prosecutor began with 6 simple words. This was never just about love. They framed the case as a story of betrayal, greed, and cold-blooded murder. They laid out their evidence in a way that made it impossible to ignore. They made one promise. By the end of this trial, there will be no doubt that Leon Ramirez and Daniel Cruz planned, executed, and tried to cover up the murder of Marco Santos. The order of evidence presentation. To keep the jury engaged, the prosecution followed a structured timeline, presenting Marco's last day, security footage, phone calls, social media posts. The murder scene, forensic analysis, DNA, and toxicology reports. The conspiracy, recovered messages, burner phone data, surveillance records. The motive, financial fraud, life insurance, stolen assets. The cover-up, fake alibis, deleted texts, staged grief. The witness testimony, bringing the truth to life. Elena Mendoza, the neighbor, she recounted the eerie silence, the smell, and seeing Leon leave Marco's house at dawn. Marco's mother, her voice broke as she read Marco's last text. Mom, is it normal to feel like someone's watching you sleep? Linda, Marco's secretary. She testified about Marco asking to remove Leanne from his will just days before his death. Marco's driver, he described how Leanne's behavior changed, how she started staying over more frequently in the weeks before the murder. Each testimony painted a clearer picture of manipulation and premeditation. Expert witnesses. Science doesn't lie. Forensic pathologist confirmed Marco was drugged and smothered. Digital forensic expert presented recovered texts, location data, and deleted files. Financial investigator exposed the fraudulent life insurance policy and hidden offshore accounts. Psychological profiler explained how Leanne and Daniel fit the profile of calculated, high-risk criminals. By the end of the prosecution's case, the jury didn't just understand the evidence. They could see the murder happening in front of them. Leanne and Daniel's lawyers tried everything. But no defense strategy can survive when the suspect's own lies start contradicting each other. Contradicting testimonies. Leanne's original alibi? I left Marco's house at 9:45 p.m. Then, when she realized the security footage disproved that, I actually stayed the night and left early in the morning. Which one was it? Daniel? He insisted he was home all night, until the burner phone data proved otherwise. They weren't just guilty, they were bad liars. Failed alibis and expert testimony challenges. Prosecutors played surveillance footage of Daniel's car near Marco's house on the night of the murder. A forensic analyst reconstructed the deleted texts, proving premeditation. A banking expert showed fraudulent transactions leading to Daniel and Leanne's offshore accounts. Every time the defense tried to argue coincidence, the prosecution countered with evidence. The moment that broke them. The real collapse happened when prosecutors played Leanne's practice grieving videos. The jury watched Leanne rehearsing her reaction to Marco's death. Days before his body was found, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. And for the first time since the trial started, Leanne looked nervous. The verdict: justice for Marco Santos. By the time the jury left to deliberate, there was no doubt about the outcome. The evidence was overwhelming. The lies were exposed. The deception was undeniable. It took them less than 5 hours to reach a decision. The verdict announcement. Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz were found guilty on all charges. First-degree murder, fraud and financial crimes, conspiracy to commit murder. Leanne sobbed in court. Daniel sat completely still, as if he had already known this was coming. The sentence? Life in prison without parole. The aftermath? A nation reacts. Marco's family wept. His mother, clutching the last Christmas photo they took together, simply said, "He didn't deserve this. He trusted them. And they killed him for money." Public reaction. The trial had gripped the entire country. People followed every update, every testimony, every revelation. The final verdict sent shockwaves through social media. Justice served, but still heartbreaking. She was faking her grief the whole time. Unreal. How do you kill someone you once loved? The downfall of Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz. Leanne's influencer empire collapsed overnight. Her brand deals pulled out. Her accounts were deactivated. Her fan base turned against her. Daniel lost everything. His investments were frozen. His offshore accounts were seized. His once powerful name was now only associated with murder. A legacy of betrayal. In the end, Leanne and Daniel didn't just kill Marco Santos. They killed his dreams, his business, his future. But what they couldn't take. His legacy. Santos' morning brew survived. His family and employees took over the business, keeping his vision alive. And Marco's story became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a reminder that greed has a price. And justice always catches up. The trial was over. The killers were behind bars. But one question still remained. Had Leanne and Daniel really acted alone? Because deep within the financial records, investigators found one last disturbing clue. A third party, a silent partner, and what they discovered might mean Marco Santos' murder was only part of a much bigger story. That's what we uncover next. The trial was over. The guilty were sentenced. Justice was served. But was it? Because even after the verdict, unanswered questions remained. Not just about Leanne Ramirez and Daniel Cruz, but about the money, the connections, and the possibility that someone else had played a role in Marco Santos' murder. This wasn't just about a crime of passion or greed. This was about something bigger, something that, even now, investigators are still trying to unravel. Unresolved questions, the lingering mysteries, the missing money. Investigators traced 8 million pesos to offshore accounts linked to Leanne and Daniel, but 4.2 pesos million vanished. Bank records showed a final wire transfer, but not to Daniel or Leanne. So where did it go? And more importantly, who else was involved? The third-party theory. Buried in financial records, prosecutors discovered something odd. A new name attached to some of the shell companies Daniel set up. An unknown entity with ties to a private investment firm in Hong Kong. A suspicious email from Daniel's account, sent just a month before the murder, mentioning a partner who would handle things from here. Was Marco's murder just about Daniel and Leanne? Or was there someone higher up, pulling strings? International connections. When investigators dug deeper, they found similar financial patterns in unrelated fraud cases. A coffee chain in Thailand. A business owner mysteriously dies before a major expansion deal. A Singaporean entrepreneur found dead in his office. His life insurance cashed out weeks later. A Filipino businessman disappears. His company's assets transferred to an offshore account. Each case had ties to financial fraud. And each case involved the same Hong Kong investment firm that Daniel had been in contact with. Coincidence? Or part of something bigger? The unexplained evidence. Even with the overwhelming proof against Leanne and Daniel, there were still some loose ends. A second burner phone found in Daniel's condo, never used, never traced. CCTV footage of an unidentified man meeting Daniel at a private club just days before the murder. Leanne's deleted messages referencing someone watching us. Was there someone else behind Marco's death? And if so, would they ever be found? Impact and legacy, the shockwaves of a crime. Marco's murder wasn't just a personal tragedy. Changed things. Changes in police procedure. The case exposed flaws in financial crime investigations. New cybercrime units were established to track fraud and offshore transfers linked to criminal activity. Law enforcement strengthened digital forensics teams, ensuring deleted data could always be recovered. Marco's case became a model for future financial crime investigations. Banking system reforms. After the trial, financial institutions tightened regulations on large international transfers. The Philippine government passed new laws on offshore banking transparency, something that might have saved Marco if it had existed earlier. The influence of social media. Leanne's fall from grace sparked a larger conversation about influencers and deception. How much of social media is real? How easy is it to manipulate an audience? And how far would some people go to maintain a perfect image? Community healing. Santos Morning Brew remained open, run by Marco's family and employees. The company started a scholarship fund in Marco's name, continuing his legacy of supporting young entrepreneurs. Marco was gone, but what he built lived on. Current status. Where are they now? Leanne Ramirez, life behind bars. Currently serving a life sentence in the correctional institution for women. Reports from inside say she spends most of her time alone. She continues to maintain her innocence, despite overwhelming evidence. Her fan base? Gone. Her Instagram empire? Deleted. The only thing that remains? The story of how she destroyed herself. Daniel Cruz, the broken man, serving life without parole in a maximum security prison. Sources say he refuses to speak about the case, but investigators believe he knows more than he ever admitted. His once promising financial empire? Seized and liquidated. The appeals process. Leanne filed for an appeal, claiming she was manipulated by Daniel. Daniel filed his own appeal, claiming Leanne was the true mastermind. The irony? Even in prison, they're still turning on each other. Ongoing investigations. The missing 4.2 million pesos is still unaccounted for. The mysterious offshore connections? Still being traced. And the question of whether someone else was involved? Still unanswered. The final thought, a cautionary tale. At the heart of this story, it wasn't just about money. It was about greed, deception, and betrayal. Marco Santos trusted the wrong people. And because of that trust, he lost everything. But the lesson of this case isn't just about the crime. It's about the power of greed, the illusion of perfection, and how even the closest relationships can hide the darkest secrets. And as we close this case, one question lingers. Did justice truly win? Or is the real mastermind still out there, watching, waiting, planning the next move? Because if there's one thing this case has taught us, nothing is ever as perfect as it seems.